I saw Mississippi State's gone back to having the script helmets. I like that.
I like that. It says state across there. I like
Yeah.
that.
It looks good. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody who has joined us so far for coming, and some folks will continue to trickle in as we go, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the October edition of Gardening in the Panhandle Live. This is our herbs and cool season edibles edition. We thank you for submitting questions, and we have a great panel of folks here for you, and a good group of folks behind the scenes. So I'll go through and introduce our folks, and then we'll get right to it. So first up on our panel, we have Beth Bowles. Beth, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Good to have you. We've got DeAnthony Price. DeAnthony, how are you doing?
Listen, I'm alive and well. I'm doing really good.
That's all. I love your background too. That's pretty great.
Thank
Did you
you
do?
so much.
Is that a picture you took?
Yes, so I grew these about 3 or 4 years ago in a community farm that I started, and I was like, they look beautiful. Let's do it.
I like it. And last but certainly not least, just south of me in Gulf County, we have Mr. Ray Baudry. Ray, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I hope everyone out there and the land is doing well too, and just great to be here.
That's right. Well, of course, the Gators and the Dogs are looking forward to meeting in Jacksonville in a couple of weeks. So that's the Ray and Daniel Bowl right there. So
that's right. It won't be long.
It's getting close. Goodness gracious.
Is Florida ready?
No, no, not ready. But we'll go ahead. We'll get off that topic as fast as possible and get back onto herbs and cool season edibles. We're going to start with our vegetables. That was kind of the biggest topic that we had here. And the first question we're going to have are what veggies to plant. And so I'll start with Beth, and then DeAnthony will throw that to you and get some of y'all's ideas on what are some of your favorite cool season vegetables to grow.
All right. So this is our great season. We have been waiting all summer to get to fall. And sometimes our fall comes a little bit later than our calendar, our vegetable gardening guide states. But we are right here in October, and now's the time to be putting a lot of these cool season vegetables in. You have some that you can put in that are going to be pretty quick. We're really getting started with our lettuces. There's lots of varieties of leaf lettuce and romaine and butter crunch that you can put in. And that's going to be ready pretty quick, along with your radish that you like. We know those are the fastest to come up. But we love some of the cool season things like broccoli, cabbages, even the Chinese cabbage, the bok choys are really good. And if you're willing to wait a little bit, you want to go ahead and get your sweet onions. And these are short day variety sweet onions. Put your garlic in and put your leeks in, and those will be ready for you about next spring. So you do wait on those, but fall is the time to plant. And we'll let DeAnthony share a few more of his favorites to put in.
Yeah, go ahead, DeAnthony. Fall is the best time to garden, in my opinion. The weather's better, plants, a lot of these things grow really well. Let's hear, what are some of your favorite fall and winter time cool season vegetables to grow?
Well, Daniel, you say what I tell everybody. Growing in the fall is my favorite, and the reason being for that is number one, it's cooler outside, so we are not outside burning up the whole time. But also when you think about, since it is cooler, you have a very low pressure of disease and pests to deal with. So some of my favorite things that I grow in the fall, and what everyone should be eating on Thanksgiving and all that fun stuff, is all of your greens. So right now I actually just planted a few rows of collard greens, and then also some turnips, and so a lot of your brassicas will do very, very well. And then also we can talk about our root crops. So your carrots, your radishes, and then like what Beth just said, if you wait a little bit, you can get more of your onions and things of that nature. So you have a very good variety of things that we can most definitely grow during the cooler months.
What about potatoes? Y'all want to wait on those, or are we going to try to go ahead and do some early? What do you think?
So I was always told that the day to plant potatoes is Valentine's Day. So so personally, I would wait. So yes.
Okay, I appreciate it. Still a cool season vegetable, but
Yes, most
we're not quite there. Yeah. All
Most
right,
definitely.
good deal. All right, so our next one is a really good question. And so it says when to transplant seed or transplant vegetable plants. So maybe we've got seeds that we've sprouted, or maybe we're going to buy transplants. When can those be set out? And then maybe if one of y'all want to talk about, like, if you planted seeds in little trays, like when are those ready to go outside as well?
Okay. Oh, you want me to do that one, Daniel? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, a lot of times we want to get a jump start because our weather's so unpredictable as we go through this late summer, fall. Our September is still pretty warm. So if we had put out a lot of these either direct seeded in the garden or put out transplants in September, they wouldn't have prospered quite as well because of our heat. And we've been super dry. So we kind of want to still have things ready to go immediately. So we start our seeds usually about the end of August, and we'll pick a variety that we want to eat and grow. We'll start those inside in small pots and care for those under artificial lighting inside, usually because our windows don't provide enough. And we'll grow that for maybe about 5 weeks or a little bit more. And now they are at the 1st of October. Hopefully our weather's changed and they're ready to be transplanted into the garden. Now, before we take it right from the inside to outside, we kind of transition it out to a shady spot outside. We let it acclimatize to a little bit of wind so it can kind of get used to it while it's in the pot. Then we set it in the garden. If you can't do that, you may want to put a little shade cover if you planted it right in the garden as a new transplant, just because our days still get warm at this time of year. We've had a few caterpillar pests that have popped up recently on some of those leafy greens. So you do have to watch for those holes in the leaf and maybe mash those as you see them. But yeah, a lot of these plants, if you go to the store, they're going to have transplants right now. But also remember, some plants don't transplant well. So you are going to direct seed a lot of your root crops, like a carrot. And, you know, the key with carrots is they do take a little while to germinate and need good moisture during that germination period. So just make sure you read about that individual so you know if it's a quick germinator or if it does take a little more time.
Really good tips there. Thank you, Beth. Ray, I've got a question for you. This question is, can you grow lettuce throughout the winter here in the Panhandle? And if so, I assume you're going to say probably yes. Are there varieties that can be grown beyond the winter into spring, summer, and fall? Basically, are there any that also can do okay in the warmer weather? What do you think?
Really, it's best September through February, really.
Okay.
And transplants, just to pick up with what Beth was talking about, transplant survivability with lettuce is great. The Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide will help you a lot as well if you want to take a look at that, and it'll give you some good variety information if you want to put that in the chat. But a crispy variety that does well is the Great Lakes. Any of those butter varieties like Bib, Butter Crunch are great. And even any of those loose leaf types of lettuces are great, like the Royal Oak, the Red Fire, the kind that you would find in one of those kind of variety mixes at the store. All grow well here. The leafy types grow well. With the crispy, you definitely want to grow that during the coolest time of the year because they'll just burn up and not do well when it gets warm. Freezing temps too, lettuce doesn't do that great with freezing temps, so you definitely want to cover those up if we have a frost situation that emerges. And if it does get warm for long enough and the lettuce does survive during that time, you may find that the lettuce gets a little more bitter during those kind of times. Lettuce plants typically produce a little more calcium, which makes them a little bitter as opposed to them producing more sugars during that time. But if you're going to direct sow lettuce seed too, you want to make sure you're going to sow that really shallow. I mean, like 1/4 of an inch, something like that, because the seed is going to need significant sunlight for them to germinate. But yes, lettuce is a great crop to grow. You're talking probably 60 to 80 days from seed to harvest. It's a great plant also to interplant with if you've got taller vegetables and you've got some space around those taller vegetables. Lettuce is a great crop to kind of grow in between.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. One of my favorite ways to pick varieties is just to go on a seed catalog or a seed website and see what's new for the year and give it a shot. Because lettuce often does. I mean, a lot of them do really good. Have you ever had any success with iceberg? I've never done well trying to make an iceberg head here.
No, I have not either.
Yeah.
Nope.
Unfortunate. I would like to, but it just doesn't really work for me. All right. So we're going to move to our next question. Beth, this is an interesting one. Ray just mentioned that lettuce is not extremely frost proof and frost hardy. In your opinion, Beth, what vegetables and maybe even a few cool season flowering plants are really pretty much frost proof for us?
Yeah, this is our winter's so unique. We never know when a frost is going to come. And last year we had a super hard freeze and most of our vegetable gardens looked awful, even with the tougher plants. They kind of came back, like kale came back, but some of them didn't, like the lettuce. So you have some of the crops in the winter, you want to get them started, as soon as our weather turns. And so they get a little maturity so that if a frost or freeze does come, they're a little bit more tolerant of that. However, your light frost plants are going to be something like lettuce, beets, carrots, some parsley. Chard is going to be kind of intermediate. Your Chinese cabbages are going to be intermediate. And then we have the second group that tend to be a lot more hardier, which would be like your onions, leeks, garlics, your true cabbage, your heading cabbages, or your early Jersey, the small heading cabbage, some of your broccoli, mustards. Those are going to be able to withstand a little harder cold temperatures. But you may want to go ahead and get a frost cloth. So if some of these events do happen, you throw that over. And even though some of these root crops may get burned up top, you still have the root that's developing underground that will be fine, but that can set the plant back a little bit. So throwing a frost cloth over it, getting some mulch or pine straw if you don't have that, if we're going to expect water that well ahead of time. But really in winter, the danger for a lot of these crops is if we went through a super rainy period, the rot is really with cold is what really throws some of these plants off and may make some problems. So managing water is important. Don't keep them too wet if we're going to have a frost or a freeze, but balance that moisture with maybe a protection over.
Awesome. Yeah, I lost my entire lettuce crop last year in that Christmas freeze. So it wasn't great. So I will take some of those tips to mine this year. I appreciate that, Beth. And Beth, we'll stay for you. This last question on veggies. This is an interesting one to me. I've not ever tried this particular plant. So the question, rhubarb is a cool season vegetable. Has anyone tried growing it from seed in the early fall? And if so, maybe what's the best variety for our zone 8B that we have here in the Panhandle?
Okay, so yeah, a lot of people, there may be someone out there that's had some luck with rhubarb. So we're going to give you a few tips. And there's a great publication out of Texas that really outlines what you should do for a southern garden. So rhubarb is normally a perennial crop, but for us in these warm areas, it is not going to be. We're going to have to treat it like an annual. So what we'll do with rhubarb is we'll buy seeds. And two that they recommend that may be a little more tolerant of our area would be cherry and cherry red. So you're going to start these seeds indoors in August, and then after a few weeks, plant that transplant outside as our weather temperatures cool. And you're going to have to water and fertilize pretty routinely, not keeping it soaking wet, but they do like water and fertilizer. So when we get next year into spring, about maybe April, you should have some stalks forming, the petiole that you're going to harvest. Now, they're not going to develop the color always like from a more northern crop. So you'll probably have green rhubarb. But that's the best way in our southern garden that you can try it. Just remember, rhubarb leaves are not edible. They are toxic. So you're only going to eat that petiole of that plant, but you're going to start it every single year new. And that's probably the best luck you're going to have. But realize if we go through a really mild winter, rhubarb often likes a lot of chill hours, about 500. And that's not a usual winter for us every single year.
Interesting. Yeah, in my preparation for this webinar today, I had to look up what rhubarb was. I've never even seen rhubarb, so that was interesting.
No
I think
rhubarb pie?
no rhubarb pie in Daniel's house. Yeah, I may have to give it a try then. I wouldn't have known what to eat. I would have probably eaten the toxic leaves and been a goner. So there you go. Thanks for that information. So we're going to move to herbs now, and we'll stay with Beth, and then we're going to move to our throw a couple questions to our other presenters here. Beth, one of the most popular herbs to grow is cilantro, used in all kinds of, interesting cooking and all that kind of stuff. So how would you recommend in general growing herbs, but more specifically cilantro here?
Yeah, cilantro is really not a hard herb to grow if you get the season down. Sometimes we'll go to the store and we'll find cilantro for sale in the spring. People will buy it, not realizing it needs cool weather, because any heat, it usually immediately goes to flower, and you get those nice seeds, which we call coriander. Not a bad thing, but a lot of people want the green leaves. So we're planting this right now in the fall in a nice amended bed. We're direct seeding that in, and those seeds are going to germinate real quick, form a nice plant, and you just kind of water and maybe a very light fertilization. If you've got a good amended soil, you may not even need that. And cilantro will do well for you. Some people love it, some people don't. It's got a really nice fragrance, not my favorite smell, but it is a great, easy plant to use at the front of the border in a container. If you don't want to start from seed, they do sell transplants at the nursery, but maybe consider slow bolt, which is with our up and down warm weather in the winter, it will maybe keep it in leaf form a little bit longer and prevent it from going to flower. But it should be an easy plant to grow in the fall for most people direct seeding.
I like to grow cilantro, not as big of a fan of eating it. So, but it's a
I'm the
fun little
same
plant
way.
to grow. Yep. All right, Ray, let's hear from you. Ray, what are some of your favorite herbs to grow in the wintertime? I'm going to throw this to both Ray and DeAnthony, and we'll start with Ray.
Well, I'll kind of maybe run down a list a little bit of the usual suspects. Let's start with cilantro and coriander, which we're just speaking about. That's an annual too. So you got your seeds and your leaves that you can harvest there. Parsley is another one, and that's a biennial, where you want to harvest the leaves there. One tip about what I would say about parsley is it's best because it will take over a garden space in a heartbeat if you don't watch out. So if you can plant it by itself somewhere and not intermix it, that would be that's my kind of lessons learned kind of thing. Let's just say that. But thyme, chives, fennel, all perennials that you could grow. Shouldn't have a problem with those during the winter months. Oregano, sage, and dill are some that are a little bit more of a struggle, probably a little bit better to start in the spring, but you could definitely try, especially if we have a mild winter. As far as locations go, I like to tell my clients too, your back deck is a great place to put some potted herbs in places. And if you have an area in your, say, open garden space where, say, the rows just don't line up right, or you've just got a weird corner, that's a great place to plant some herbs too. And it's best, if you can, to not mix the annuals and the perennials together. If you can kind of keep them a little more separated. If not, you're going to have some little patches there at times because the annuals will die out. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents there.
All right, good deal. Thanks, Ray. DeAnthony, do you have a couple herbs that you just particularly like to grow or like to recommend that folks grow?
Yeah, so I think my 2 fellow colleagues have named a lot of them that I like to grow, but I think herbs are a great way to really incorporate with your landscaping. A lot of people use herbs when they want to have a edible landscaping. But also within your landscape, herbs can, be grown indoors, but they most definitely need to have, sunlight. But herbs is a very easy way to start growing if you are nervous about growing but want to just start easy. I think herbs are a great way. And we all love herbs during, the holidays, especially sage. And so sage is also a really good one.
All right, good deal. Thank you, D'Anthony. Beth, this is an interesting question. I wasn't 100% sure how to even ask it. But I think where we're going is, what are some herbs that we can forage for? What do you think there?
Okay, so I think what we're looking at are maybe some plants that are herbaceous, kind of woody, I'm not woody, but green, a stem that maybe just grow for wild and are
Yeah, let's go there.
So there's a couple of good weeds that are, one's going to pop up really soon called chickweed. It's a nice winter kind of weed that people have a lot of problems with. They call us to control, but it does have edible leaves. So you can wash and clean the leaves if you know the source of where you're getting that, and use that. Sometimes dandelion is harvested for different things. There's a nice native plant called peppergrass or pepperweed. That is a butterfly host plant, and that may have some uses. Right now, your Spanish needle or Bidens, it's all in seed right now, but that has some of the young tender leaves are edible. And then a couple others would be like Florida betony. We know we can eat the root of that. I don't think it has much flavor, but I'm not that desperate at this time to go harvest Florida betony. But if you want to crunch in something, that may supply it. And then, of course, smilax. Some of the very tenderest growth of smilax is edible before you get those nice prickly thorns. But anytime you're going to forage, just be very aware that there are a lot of lookalikes out there. Make sure you have accurate ID as best you can, because guess what? You can eat everything once.
That's true. Everything's edible once, right? So we don't want to mess up when doing that. D'Anthony, we'll move to a question specifically about parsley. The question is, I'm having difficulty getting flat leaf parsley to thrive. Are there special needs for growing parsley in the sandy soil that we have here in Florida? What would you recommend?
Well, I think anything within when you are, I'm talking about, sandy soils and like things of that nature. One thing that I would most definitely make sure that we're doing is adding some more organic matter. And so with that being said, a great way to do that is adding more compost. Compost is very, very useful, and you can also do this at home. I know for sure UF has a really good, easy to read publication on composting. But when you are talking about sanding soils, adding some type of soil amendment, but most definitely organic matter into that would really, really help. Because when you talk about sandy soils, a lot of things run through it. So we really need to add something that most definitely acts like a glue. And so that is a great thing that compost does.
Awesome. Yeah. So I agree with you. Anytime you're dealing with really sandy soil and you're struggling, organic matter never hurts, does it? I appreciate that. Beth, this is another one. You're about to educate me just as much as you're going to educate everybody else. Let's be honest. I have no idea what this is. How do you grow epizode? Epizode? Okay. How do you grow epizode, Beth? What is epizode?
I had to look up this herb too, because there's a lot of herbs out there. When you look in your Southern Herb Growing book, which is an excellent book out of Texas, she does describe epizode as a nice weed. And when you look up in Florida, it is a weed. And this would be one of the foraging type plants. But epizode, if you go to an Hispanic market, they would likely have this as a dried herb, because it's used a lot of times to enhance bean dishes, dried beans. If you're cooking, it adds flavor to that. But there are some precautions with epizode you have to be careful of. It's not for everybody. There could be some interactions if you eat too much. You can't, if you want to start this, you can buy seeds. I would, go to a mail source and purchase you some seeds, but be aware, once this plant flowers and seeds itself, it can become weedy. So this is one you may want to set off by itself, keep in a container. but it's going to grow well as a perennial in our warm season, kind of a tender perennial. It would die back or it would reseed on its own. But it will do well in Florida and can be found in many Florida counties just growing naturally. But there's a great article again from Texas that talks a little bit about this herb used and how it, a little bit more about it, because it's not one we commonly find in many herb gardens. It would be kind of those that are familiar with this one, maybe from some of their family and how they've grown it. Used
Okay, interesting. This has been very educational for me, Beth. I appreciate that. And Beth, we'll stay with you for this last question in the herb category that we're going to talk about before we move to some cultural practices and general growing tips. What pest spray is the best to use on these cool season herbs and vegetables? If we have some pest or disease issues, what would you recommend?
Yeah, and we do. We, like D'Anthony mentioned, we are so fortunate with this cooler weather. That's the enjoyable part. Our pest numbers greatly decrease. The big ones are these transition periods. Right now, we are having a lot of caterpillar problems just because we're still warm, and these new tender leaves have just been set out. So a lot of little army worms, some loopers come about. So a lot of caterpillars. And if you want to manage some of those, I just go out, and if I see a hole on the leaf, I'll turn it over. So scouting is really important, and I'll actually just mash them. You can't catch them all that way. So you may want to think about something that's safe, like a BT product or a dipel that's labeled for vegetables. There's also some organic, if you think you have a leaf beetle that sometimes gets on these plants, like the spinoscids, those would be fairly safe for you. There's not a lot of bees visiting unless they're in flower, so you should be safe with that. And then, of course, if you had aphids on some of these new tender foliage, some insecticidal soap. The key with disease management is just to water the base of the plant as best you can to keep that off. And then, for vegetables, if you need a product that's labeled for vegetable gardens, maybe use one of the protectant fungicides for that. That's labeled for edible plants. Always read that label on some of those just to make sure there's no wait period, because sometimes we're harvesting lettuce very routinely, and we wouldn't want to spray something that had a few-day harvest and miss that. So just be aware, always read that label. But soaps, BT, spinoscids, those may be the safest things for you to do if you're not just going to manually crush what you find.
All right, good deal. Thank you, Beth. And I'll give you the first question on this cultural practices group. What perennials will survive the winter in a raised bed? So you can do ornamentals, you can do edibles. Just give us a couple. What do you think?
What perennials will survive? Well, a lot of the ones, D'Anthony mentioned quite a few, I think, that will survive. Our rosemary, oreganos, thymes will survive. If we don't get too wet, sage will make it really well in there. Now some perennials and annuals, we mentioned like a flowering plant you could do would be like calendula, the pot marigold, that will love the cold, do very well. Pansies and violas would do well. If we get a hard freeze, the flowers will be injured, but they can pop right back up. So maybe some of the others have a couple more they can think of.
Anybody else got any thoughts on that one before we move to our next question? Hearing none.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covered.
Hearing none, Ray, we're coming right back to you for this next question. So the question is cover crops. So what do you think about using cover crops for, that during the winter time, maybe after our fall garden to prep, help prep the soil for our spring garden?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a huge cover crop fan, whether it's in the garden or if it's in the pasture. I love cover crops. And whether or not to leave a place fallow or use a cover crop, I'd always use a cover crop. It's not a lot of soil amendment needed to get them going. You just till in this cover crop at the end of the season, and you've got some vital nutrient there. Buckwheat's a good one to use. You can use that in the spring or even in the fall, 3 to 5 weeks, and it's up and it's done its thing, and it decomposes really quickly too. So that's a really good one. And then think about too, there's some cool season legumes that you can use as a cover crop. Your clovers, I know probably everyone's seen the red clover that pops up on the right of ways on our state and county roadways. at times a year. Now, DOT uses that for really a two-sided coin kind of measurement there, where they're using it as an erosion control practice, but it's also a beautification method too that's used. They like the really sandy soils, the red clovers does. So if your garden is a little more sandy, it'd probably be what you would want to use. The white clover is likes the more organic kind of soils, and will actually, if you were to leave the white clover alone, it would really turn into more of a perennial. But those are two really good clovers to use that you can till back into the soil in the spring. Really cut your nitrogen fertilizer need down too, with putting so much nitrogen back in the soil. Vetch is another one that can be used. Another legume, has a really beautiful purple flower. You've probably found this in your landscape as a weed at times. Especially if you're in an area where there's a lot of pasture land around you, and ranchers are overseeding with vetch. And pollinators love both of these. Honeybees love the vetch, they love the clovers. So that's also another great thing. And plus it just really looks great in the garden too. It's a really pretty landscape in the garden.
It is. It kind of dresses things up over the winter and definitely improves that soil. So I'm like Ray, always going to recommend a cover crop. If you have a gap between plantings, get something growing in there. That's awesome.
Sometimes there's a really a laundry list of cool season clovers that can be used, and even mixes that you could actually try if you wanted to. Now, some of them can get a little pricey, but if you're talking about a backyard garden, it's not going to be that taxing.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of seed, so that's good. DeAnthony, this is just a good general question. We've already kind of hit it a little bit, but maybe just kind of give everybody a review as we close out here in a few minutes. What are we looking to plant here over the next 2 or 3 weeks?
Yeah, so what are we looking to plant over here within our next 2 weeks? One of our biggest crop families that we need to be looking at is our brassica family. So and so that relates to all of our leafy greens. Now, a good question that I get all of the time when I'm talking about growing in the fall is, what should I seed? What should I go to transplant? My greatest answer to that is all of your root crops should most definitely be started by seed. Simply because their main job is to grow underground. So if we disturb them while growing, that will hurt them. And so we just want to make sure what we are seeding and what we are not seeding. Now, when we are I'm talking about a lot of our root crops, but just in a lot of seeds in general, is a lot of our cool season seeds are very small. So one thing that we want to make sure that we are doing with our root crops is thinning them. We want them to have enough space where they feel like they can grow and be as strong as they can. And so it is very hard to plant very tiny seeds spaciously. So we tend to try to thin that row out nice and good, but also coming back about 2 or 3 weeks after germination to really make sure that we thin them out to make sure that they have their space needed. But so overall, just think about the fall as I need to plant something green. So
Got you. Thank you. Yeah, you do have to thin those things out, and another thing that I like to do with those really small seeds, it is a little bit of extra money, but if you don't have a lot of space you're planting in, is buy the pelletized seed.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to handle especially for those of us with clumsy fingers and eyes that aren't so good. It definitely helps. So you can look at that. It is a little bit more expensive, but it's a lot easier to handle. Ray, let's hit this question. Looking for some suggestions on the best ideas for a cool season garden location. What are we looking for in a location for a cool season garden?
Location, you're going to want, for most of these crops, you're going to need some full sun. But I like, as far as location goes, I mean, you can use a flat ground area, especially with leafy greens, and you can really broadcast over that area, and then go, like DeAnthony was referring to, go back through and thin out. that can be used. I'm a big fan, if you're a backyard gardener in the city, I'm a big fan of raised beds, and they're just fine for this kind of application as well. I'd also add to some of the crops that could be grown. You could also grow cauliflower and broccoli this time of year, even carrots, celery, and radish. And what I like about carrots and radishes is those are two that are really great to kind of plant along together, because kind of interplant a little bit together, because the carrots, they're gonna take a little bit longer to harvest, but your radishes are typically done in like 30 days. So that's a good way to kind of maximize some space too.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Again, just looking for that nice full sun site with good soil. And like Ray said, if you don't have good soil, you can make it in a raised beds.
That's right.
That's what I like to do. And so we had a little bit of a shorter session today. So I want to end with everybody, our panelists, just kind of giving us some of their thoughts on what they want to leave you guys with today. So Beth, what's a cool season gardening thought you would like to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, grow what you're going to eat for sure. You know, I'm not going to eat turnips, so I don't plant turnips. I'm going to eat a lot of broccoli. I love fresh broccoli. There's nothing like it. So that's what I'm going to plant the most of. So, but then try, like Daniel said, try something new. It's always fun to get in the seed catalog and see something exciting and add that to your cart and try a new vegetable every year.
I love that. And that's my favorite thing to do, is just even within species or varieties that I like, pick a new cultivar, mix it up a little bit. If you like broccoli, try purple broccoli, the sky is the limit. So Ray, what's a cool season gardening tip or thought you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Well, I would say, let me just say, what's great about the cool season gardening for me is that we have so many pest issues in Florida, especially in the northern end of Florida, that it's great that you can almost have a stress-free kind of fall gardening, as opposed to the warmer season, because you just have so many insects that time of year. That's what's great. You don't have to use lots of chemicals during the fall, because the pest pressure is so low. And one other thing I'd like to say too, and I'm not a family and consumer science agent, but I guess I play one on gardening in the Panhandle today. But if you have, a lot of people have issues with sodium intake and they're looking for something, they can't use as much salt, think about herbs. Herbs is a great way to add flavor to your foods too, without having to use sodium. So I know that's a big point that our FCS agents use in making in gardening. So I'd like to pass that along too.
Thank you for that little tidbit, Ray. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And DeAnthony, you knew it was coming. You're the last one up. What's a gardening thought you'd like to leave us for cool season 2023 going into 2024?
Yeah, Daniel. So my first thing is, let's try something new. New things are always fun. Let's, spend some time out there to really learn what we are working with. So let's most definitely try something new. But also let's try to do more interplanting and more succession planting. So especially with like a lot of your root crops, they don't need a lot of space. So you are most definitely able to plant those in between your rows to really maximize your space. But also let's try to plan out to where we get a harvest every week. And so especially with like your radishes and, more of your root crops, if we plant once a week for, the next month, well, then, the next months we have them harvest, once a week. And so let's try some new things up. Most definitely trying new things is always good for the soul. So
there you go.
Literally.
I like that. I like that succession planning tip. That's very good. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us today on our Cool Season Herbs and Veggies Gardening in the Panhandle Live. We are going to be taking a winter hiatus. We will be back in spring 2024. The date is TBD, to be determined, most likely March, April, although we will have potentially, as conditions arise like we did last year, we will address any kind of special gardening needs that come up during the winter. If we have a major freeze event, how to handle things like that. But look for us to return in the spring of 24. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. Thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you to our behind the scenes folks. And of course, most of all, thank you to our attendees. Please remember to fill out our survey. And if you aren't a subscriber to Gardening in the Panhandle newsletter, there will be one coming out this afternoon. Please do so. There is a link in the chat right there. And with that, we will be signing off, wishing everybody happy holidays and all of that good stuff. And we will see y'all on the flip side in 2024.
Everybody have a great day.